I turn that back on? I think I did.
Cool. Kia ora, everyone. Just checking sound. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah. I feel like I'm a 40-year-old lecturer, but it's all good? Sweet. Awesome. Kia ora, everyone. Welcome to the Young Public Servants Debate hosted by AUSA and PSA Youth. My name is Alan Shaker, and I have the warm privilege of co-moderating this debate alongside my friend from the PSA Youth, Tatiana. So before I start and before we get the candidates to introduce themselves, we'll just go through a couple of health and safety points.
Oh, yeah, we'll
go. In the event of an emergency, please stay calm, follow the instructions, exit through the exit signs. Just straight out there and then down the corridor. I think the first door is females and the next door after that is males. So yeah, as I said, this debate is hosted by the Auckland University Students Association in partnership with the Public Service Association Youth. So we've worked together on this debate and sort of bringing it to you here today. Just very quickly, I do want to make a shameless plug. AUSA, if you're a student or even if you're not, come check out the campus next week. We are hosting our last themed week for the semester. Sorry, the week after, I believe. No, next week. It's Women's Suffrage Week, so it's proudly brought to you by AUSA. Awesome work from our engagement VP and our Women's Rights Officer to bring that to you. So check out our Instagram for more details and come check out the events next week if you're around. Cool. So we are going to get the candidates to introduce themselves. If you can keep this fairly brief, please. Just literally your name, your party, and maybe a quick fun fact. So we will start with Damian, if you want to just quickly introduce yourself.
Sure, Koto. My name's Damian Sycamore. I'm the Opportunities Party's candidate for Auckland Central. I'm actually a very serious unfunny guy, so I'll probably skip the facts and just get into it. Let's go.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko taku tonu ana Natasha Kent tōku ingoa. Nā reiri nā te tūwhari toa me nā iwi mōkai Mātia hei taikapi a hau. I always tell people I'm the very privileged and humble candidate for Tamaki Makaurau for Te Pati Māori. With a background in health, youth development, Māori, everything. But living out in South Auckland and yeah, love being part of campaigning and being part of a movement, forever movement to Pati Māori. Kia ora. Is this thing on?
Hello. Yeah, cool. Wow. Bonus points. Kia ora hoama. My name is Chlöe Swarbrick. I have the privilege of serving as the Auckland Central MP and have been a Green MP for the past 6 years. And I'll do it again if you re-elect me, please. Fun fact about me, up until the point that I was elected in 2017, I ran a little art gallery, coffee and donut shop on Mount Eden Road.
Kia ora everybody, my name is Felix. I'm the ACT Party candidate for Auckland Central. I'm number 25 on the ACT Party list. I currently work at a community law centre down in Manukau. I really care about issues related to young people and their legal rights, and my fun fact is that Alan is my old boss.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Camilla Belich Te Hau. I'm Camilla Belich. I'm a Labourist MP. I've been an MP for the last 3 years. And fun fact about me, I was 3 days old when I went to my first PSA meeting.
Bonus points.
Nā mihi nui ki a koutou, I ringo i te kaipapa taranei, ko Hinurewa Te Hau taku ingo, ko mani a pōto tūwhari tōna ti raukawa, tōko māma, ko Ngāti Heeni, te whakatōhia, Ngāti Kahununu, tōko pāpa. Anō reira, tēnā rā koutou katoa. I'm the National Party candidate for the Māori seat of Tamaki Makaurau. It's the first time in 2 decades they've put a Māori into the Māori seat. So the fun thing would be that's very progressive. And I'm standing in tonight for Hinurewa Te Hau, who's the Auckland Central candidate. He sends his apologies for not being able to be here tonight. So kia ora.
Kia ora. Kia ora, thank you. And we unfortunately don't have Heeni Phillips-Williams from New Zealand First unable to join us today, so apologies on their behalf. Before I hand it over to Tatiana to sort of take us through the issues for today, just quickly about the rules of the debate. So each candidate will get 1 minute, 30 seconds to answer each question. And then following that, when the candidate has finished, other candidates can choose to respond for them for 1 minute maximum. The candidate being addressed has the right of reply. Throughout the debate, the MCs may throw out quick and fun questions. There will be follow-up questions or bonus questions submitted electronically from the crowd. We will put these forward at the end. The MCs have discretion over what is asked. Really important, no heckling unless it's funny. We had a question, who judges whether it's funny, and that's us.
Yeah.
So you've got to, if it's funny to us, then you're good. And no booing unless someone is breaking one of the rules. The event is obviously being live streamed, proudly brought to you by 95 BFM, one of our partners at AUSA. So a massive thank you to Tom and his team for live streaming the event today. Cool, I think that covers the rules, so now I'll hand it over to Tatiana to talk us through the issues.
Oh, really quickly too. Hi, is this one working? Yeah? Yes? No? Hi. This is our link for our Slido questions, so take a real quick picture of that or get signed in really quickly so you can pop through your questions as we go. I'm going to give this 10 seconds to connect because I'm not confident this one's going. Is everyone good? Do we still need time? No. Yeah, great. Kia ora, my name is Tatiana. I'm an organiser with the Public Service Association, and I am here on behalf of our youth network, which is our network for members who are aged 35 and under, which includes our student members. And as you can see with our pull-up banner, we have free student membership. So it's been a real privilege to work alongside AUSA to be here today. In the kind of lead up to the general election, the PSA Youth Network put out a survey to all of our members to say what issues will be the most important to you in deciding who to vote for in this year's general election. Members identified a range of issues, and it is summarised in this word cloud. The issues that came up most often were the cost of living, climate change, and the housing crisis. The cost of living and housing were the most frequently discussed and linked often to climate change. So you can see the link demonstrated here. Ooh, sorry, I probably should have been flicking through these this whole time I was talking. Change in our public services. So members were asked, thinking about the effectiveness of public and community services, what do you think most needs to change? The services mentioned most often in the response to this question were mental health, public transport, and healthcare, kind of in a general sense. Change frequently identified as needed in the health system included things like effectiveness, accessibility, wait times, and dental care. And people said that support, investment in social support and infrastructure and funding was mentioned as an issue in relation to many different services, including those already mentioned regulatory services. Members said that there was an urgent need for investment in and focus on people doing the work, including through investment in skills and training and in decent pay and conditions to address issues with recruitment and retention, i.e. high turnover in our public services because they're not getting paid enough, so there's not enough people working, so there's too much work, and so they leave, and so on and so on. And here you can kind of see the interrelation between the issues our members identified. So then we move on to meeting the needs of young people. So fewer than 2 in 10 of those who responded thought that public and community services were doing well in Aotearoa. And again, that same number thought that we were meeting the needs and priorities of young people. Members were asked to share any thoughts and ideas they had around this. Let me see, there we go. The most common themes that we saw in the comments were the need for services to be designed for young people and by young people, the need for improvements to mental health services and other measures to support good mental health for younger people, and the critical urgency of dealing with the housing crisis and the cost of living. Which I think leads us quickly into our first question. In terms of how we'll answer, I think we'll start at this end, so start at that end for introductions. So we'll start with you, Hinurewa. The question is around public service Young people want public services that are aimed at young people and designed by young people. How will you ensure that services for young people are fit for purpose?
Oh, kia ora, thank you for that. So we want to see that all public services are focused on delivering outcomes that work for people who rely on them, especially for yourselves as you come into the workforce. There is a Ministry of Youth Development. National is focused on looking at devolving of local services and seeing what that ministry may look like, what levels of new investment may be required into that ministry to be able to support new services and what the wraparound services may be. You know, it's really important, isn't it, to listen to people's points of views. Is exactly why we're here today when designing public services and backing people to have more control over their lives. We can see that policies from the last national government, this one may be more focused on disabilities, but certainly enabling good lives for our disability community, which empower people is important. We need to be able to empower yourselves as well. Fundamentally, a lot of our public services we feel are not working for everyone, let alone young people. So health is a prime example. Mental health services, are they working well? Is the investment going where it should be going? So, you know, we need to be able to review that and look at that. Kia ora.
Kia ora, thank you, Hinurewa. Are there any candidates who want to reply, or shall we just move on to Camilla? Yep.
So you starting the timer?
Yes, we'll start the time.
Right.
Colleagues behind you.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Good question. I think that it is really important that public services do serve young people, and the reason I think that is because I think that when they serve the population that they're meant to serve, they are more effective. And a quick story on that is when I was a teenager, I was involved in setting up a youth health service, and it was a by young people for young people youth health service. It's now been running for over 20 years, and I think one of the main reasons it works well is because it was set up with the focus of making sure that it was run by young people and serving their needs. And obviously we can't do that in the entire public service, but I think the philosophy of it, which is making sure that the people who the public service is trying to assist or empower are involved in decision making, is a really good way to make sure that public services are effective in meeting the needs of the community.
Yeah, I'll try to do this very briefly because the public service is such a huge issue, to be honest, but I think that the public service as an issue is especially tragic when it comes to this government. I mean, they've put billions of more dollars into it, but outcomes for our young people and for people at large haven't seemed to get better. People are waiting longer in emergency rooms for care. There are more kids that are truant than ever before, so something's wrong. What's wrong is that the public service isn't focused on its core responsibilities, and that is delivering those public services. It also hasn't devolved properly to communities where it can. So really, ACT's proposal for a better public service is to say, actually, where we can, we should devolve to the community and say, sometimes communities know best how to run those core services, like education, like social services. You know, ACT had a policy to do that. We had charter schools. We said, actually, you know, local communities should run schools in their communities. Labor got rid of that. It was a really effective policy at actually getting good outcomes for young people, especially Māori and Pacifica communities. Very disappointed by that. But also we need to say there are some things that the public service isn't actually very good at doing. And if private companies are willing to do it better, for a better cost and invest more money, then they should do it. And that's something that the ACT Party endorses. I've only got a minute 30 seconds, so I think I'll hand it over.
That's good. I haven't heard dings from our bells yet, so you must be good in time.
So practical stuff, revoke voluntary student membership, which the ACT Party members bill under the former National ACT government put in place in around 2012-2014, which resulted in massive under-resourcing of student associations and means that there's the inability to run long-term campaigns. Make it 16. Lower the voting age. Most people were not necessarily aware that for the majority of this country's history, the voting age was 21. Ensure that resources go to young people, especially young people that the government consults with, which the government and both at central and local government tends to then burn out. Abolish the youth wage or the starting wage. This is something that Ricardo Menendez March's youth MP put forward, and it got through with flying colours at youth parliament. For some reason, adult parliament doesn't want to do it. And expand peer support services. To Camilla's point, we know full well that when young people are being paid well at the living wage, as we experienced with the initial Piki pilot project, which is a mental health support service that we established in the Greater Wellington region, with support of AUSA, the Victoria University of Wellington Students Association, that is one of the awesome opportunities that we have with regard to ensuring that everybody has access to mental health support.
When I think about fit for purpose, because that was the question, are these services fit for purpose? Not for Māori. They're not fit for purpose. However, we think about things as rangatahi na rangatira o te anainei. The rangatahi or youth are leaders of the now, they're not leaders of the future. And if you've seen Te Pāti Māori's investment in rangatahi, we have the youngest incoming MP in Hana, and Hana sends her apologies. She's at Waikato University tonight. So, I've had years of working in rangatahi, with rangatahi, specialising in Māori youth services in South Auckland. I was the CEO of Te Kaho o Te Rangatahi. Rangatahi always told me, adults don't listen to us. They don't listen to what we have to say, and I've always said that rangatahi have solutions, they have the answers. We just don't listen as adults. So it's time, actually, if we want fit for purpose, rangatahi need to be at the tepu, they need to be part of the decision making. They're always told what to do, but actually they have solutions, they need to be there to actually be part of the design and co-design. It's all about access and affordability. They need to be able to have services that are easily accessible to them. They need to be able to afford. We need more free services for rangatahi to be able to lift them out of welfare, lift them out of the poverty. The biggest iwi in Tamaki Makaurau is Ngāti Pohara, those in poverty, and that's our people. Kia ora.
Kia ora, well said, Takutai. So the Opportunities Party has very much a youth focus. It's been made clear time and time again that New Zealand's governments deprioritise the concerns of the young for the concerns of the vested interests at the time. One of the smaller policies that no one will ever see because of the lack of coverage that TOP gets through this campaign is that we would like to initiate a Future Generations Commission, basically for exactly the same reasons that Takutai has just said, that future generations and our youth should have a seat at every table where decisions of their future are being discussed. Now, one of the things that I've noticed as a somewhat young person, but still a dad, so not that young, pretending to be young kind of guy, is that it's actually quite difficult to get involved in politics. You have to earn a lot less money. You have to cop a lot of shit. You have to be pretty resilient. You have to, to use the silly conjoined word twice, but deprioritise a lot of the things that you were doing previously. The Opportunities Party is trying to enable young people to be able to make that decision if they want to and get involved in Parliament by initiating the Teal Card, which would give them free access to healthcare, free dental care, free public transport, and a number of other benefits, particularly but not least, access to better civic education so that they can more adequately participate in the complex, crazy town of Parliament in New Zealand.
Kia ora koutou, thank you for your answers. I've got a real quick question since we're talking about young people. For context, my dream job when I was about 7 years old was to be the person at the supermarket who packed your bags. I thought that was real neat. So what was your dream job when you were a child? Go down the line, we'll come back this way.
I do have one. When I was like 7 years old, this is such an insight into how much of a nerd I am. We had to do pretend CVs, and my dream jobs were pro skater and diplomat.
I went to school in Ellerslie Primary, and on the way to school you have to go over this bridge, and it goes over a railway track, and I always used to stand on the railway track, watch all the trains, so my dream job was, of course, being a train driver.
Go the trains!
I think also your dream is totally amazing. I think a job worth doing is a job worth having, and there is dignity in all work. So that's something that I've always believed in. When I was a teenager, I thought being a bicycle courier would be really awesome because you got to do exercise and work and be paid at the same time. Yeah.
Well, I wanted to be a teacher, and I take my hat off to all the teachers out there, and they need to be paid more.
Yes. Yes.
I remember distinctly wanting to be a vet for most of my entire life, and then I just started reading some really good books and went on a really weird path since then.
I wanted to follow in my father's footsteps and be an academic and travel the world. And I got to travel the world, and I did get to be an academic for a short time. And yeah, it was pretty cool, I have to say. Yeah.
I love that, achieving your dreams, huh?
Well, you know, whānau is so important, you know, legacy stuff and, you know, my great... So I'm just going to answer this. Who's the biggest role models? Mine's my parents, mum and dad, eh? Without them, I couldn't be here today. So, you know, I'm their legacy, so that for me is very important. So thanks for the questions.
Thank you. Do you guys want to answer that question?
I have a few role models, but one person that was very influential on my life was a woman called Helen Kelly. She used to be the president of the Council of Trade Unions, very good friend of mine, a mentor of mine, very supportive, hugely inspirational, and really was proud to be in Parliament when we passed the Fair Pay Agreements legislation, which is really her legacy.
Yeah, I'd have to say that my mum and dad are definitely, you know, big role models in my life, both of them public servants, but I definitely didn't end up doing what they're doing because it's very difficult and their job's very hard and they don't get paid a lot to do it.
For me, it would be my old man. I grew up arguing with him, and it was one thing that he used to always say is that different people see different things differently, and then I went to uni here and studied a philosophy degree and learned that my dad is not Socrates and did not come up with the idea of subjectivity, but it's something which I've carried through into how I do politics.
Yeah, my grandmother was my biggest role model, and yeah, I think for us as Māori, whānau are everything, and yeah, I think we need to always reflect on the beauty of our whānau and our parents and what they've done for us. And, you know, we're here now, but for us it's about our Aotearoa hau and what we're going to leave behind for our mokopuna.
I've got one. I've got three. They're going to sound odd, but I do mean this. First one would be Naomi Klein. Second one would actually be Chlöe Swarbrick. No shit. And third would be Richie McCaw, in like no specific order.
In that order.
No specific order.
I thought you said it was Rawiri.
He's totally smashing it, but
Rawiri as well.
Yeah, that's from the last couple of years.
All right, thank you guys. I'll kick it back to my friend Alan with our next question on the cost of living.
Cool. That was very wholesome. But now we're going to talk about cost of living. And my notes here tell me that it's a simple question, but we'll see about that. So the question reads, tell us how you will support New Zealanders in keeping up with the unmanageable rise in the cost of living. And maybe we'll start with Damian? Yeah. Yep, there you go.
Well, I've talked to many students here at Auckland Uni, and a month ago we were on a panel, Hinurewa and I, with Penny here with the Māori students. And a lot of the students said to us, there's a cost of living crisis. We're at a point in our life whether we decide to continue to study or to go and work, because we can't do both and we're struggling. We can't afford housing, rent has increased, the cost of living has increased, we just don't know what to do anymore. My mental health is going skyrocketing, and I don't know what I should do anymore. I don't know if I should even be here, because I'm now making a decision whether I should work or whether I should study. And I think back then I said, you know what, we need you to continue to study because it's important. And for Māori, education is a priority for us to lift the level of status for our people. So I encourage all our Māori students to keep going. We want you to study. You know, there is a cost of living crisis, and Te Pāti Māori want to remove GST immediately off kai, not just fruit and veggies, but all kai, except alcohol and cigarettes. You know, so you can put 15% back into your pocket. We want whānau to be able to make better decisions, to make more decisions for them. Te Pāti Māori, anyone earning $30,000 or less is zero tax. You know, again, putting more money back into your pockets. And that helps when you're a student and when you're trying to work as well. You know, anything we can do, it's all about whānau for us at Te Pāti Māori.
Me?
We'll go on to Chlöe.
All right, cool. So what is this thing that we call the economy? It's all of us and the stuff that we create and the planet that we live on and the resources that we use and the rules and regulations that we put in place to determine the kinds of outcomes that we want. And it turns out since the 80s and 90s reforms, that economy has been premised on the notion of trickle-down economics, which has disproportionately benefited those at the top end of town. Meanwhile, we've also seen a privatisation of what were previously considered public assets, and we've seen that trajectory of travel in institutions like our universities, which in turn has put downward pressure on students and therefore on the cost of living. So if you look at a piece of work that was recently released by a range of different NGOs looking into the drivers behind inflation and this cost of living, you can see that it is, again, the evidence attributes approximately half of our current inflation pressures to corporate profits or to excess corporate profits. And I think in that you have a real key or a real answer to the issue, which is that we need to fix the tax system and we have to ensure that we are going to look after everybody so that they have the opportunity to participate and to contribute in society fulsomely and properly.
Just to clarify any misinformation, half of the inflation that we are facing today is actually because of supply side, which is the government printing money and spending it irresponsibly. That's one of the biggest drivers of inflation in this country. The reality is that food's gone up 12%, transport's gone up 9%, inflation right now is 6.7%, and people are finding it really tough. Now, every other party on here is proposing different ways to make it easier for people. They're going to give you $60 extra a fortnight or an income guarantee. But the reality is if the cost of goods keeps going up, then it doesn't really matter what these parties give you. When we think about solutions to New Zealand's economy, we need to look at Australia, because the reality is the median wage here is $27 an hour and the median wage in Australia is $37. And if you're earning $10 more an hour, then of course you're going to find things a lot better. And the reason why Australia is doing so much better is because they're a way more productive country. So if we actually want to fix New Zealand's cost of living crisis, we need to take a step back and say it's actually a productivity crisis. And we need to make New Zealand a productive country. Now, the way we do that is very complicated and it'll take a lot of reform in government and in the private sector. And that's what ACT proposes. We've got to reform the RMA, get an Urban Development Act, we've got to change our settings on immigration, we've got to cut taxes, we've got to cut regulation, we've got to refocus our public service onto productivity and change the way we do things in this country. Because the reality is, Labour and Greens are more of the same. They've been in government for 5 years, they've spent $100 billion, their solutions haven't worked and people are struggling right now.
Damian wants to respond and I'd love to respond too.
I think you've got to go around to everybody first.
Sure, we'll go Damian maybe first.
Are we going down the line or are we responding?
You can respond and then we'll come down the line. So Damian maybe first?
Go Chlöe, I'm still working out my first.
Okay.
If we wanted to, is he going to respond? This is going to be an infinite loop.
We'll stop it, don't worry, don't worry.
Yeah, how about this
Proposal.
Yeah.
How about we do Labour and National and then we'll go back to us?
We're going to just have a debate. I mean, this is the theory of who the economy is supposed to serve. And the point that I would just make very quickly about Australia is that they also have higher income tax brackets and a capital gains tax. If we want to talk about productivity and the keys to unlocking that, then we need to talk about investment in public transport, because currently in Tamaki Makaurau alone, we're wasting $1 billion in productivity every single year in just this city. And then we also need to talk about massive investment in tertiary education, which, again, if you look at the ideological drive behind the 1980s reforms, which led to effectively the privatisation in this space, that is precisely what Felix is saying did not go far enough.
Look, Chloe can cite Australia, but the reality is Australia digs a whole lot of coal, iron and gold and all these minerals out of the ground. They send to China and they make billions off that. And that's one of the main reasons why their country is so productive and why their people are so rich. But Chloe won't tell that to you. She'll just talk about other stuff. Okay. Now, when it comes to the wealth tax, we're going to
go to Damian and then we'll come back to Labour and
Can I just finish off my 30-second spiel? Okay.
A lot more than 30
If we
seconds.
could solve all our problems by taxing the rich, we would. But the reality is it doesn't work. Because guess what? If you tax rich people, they're just going to go overseas. And when they go overseas... Chloe, please, I did not interrupt you. And when they go overseas, all they're going to do is they're going to take their businesses with you, they're going to take all their capital, they're going to take their capital with them, and we're going to be worse off as a country. They're going to take their income with them. All countries which have implemented a capital gains tax have seen an overall reduction in the tax take that their country takes, and that's why their ideas are very dangerous.
All right, thank you, Felix. We'll go to Damian, and then we're going to come on to this side.
Sweet.
Please Google it. Please just Google it.
Please do. Please do.
Thank you, Felix.
So at that, just to respond to the last kind of 30 seconds, there are different ways of taxing wealth, and one of the ways that the Opportunities Party is proposing to tax wealth is with the land value tax. It's very difficult, Felix, for a land value tax to leave for land to leave the country. Also, 70% of New Zealand's wealth is held in land, and there are other benefits to putting in a land value tax other than just being fiscally neutral and kicking in some massive income tax cuts, which I'm looking forward to getting into shortly. One of the big benefits of a land value tax is it discourages people from tipping more money into a property market, which is currently contributing about 60% to the cost of living. The cost of housing in New Zealand is unfathomably large, and it's the cost of land that drives up rent and drives up the mortgage, the price of having a mortgage. Now, the terror of an ACT/national government is that they're going to roll back all of the good little things that Labour and Greens have been able to do to start weaning us off our terrible pathological addiction to overinvestment in property.
Awesome. All right, we'll hear from Camilla from Labour.
Thank you. I think the question was about the cost of living, so I'll go over our policies on cost of living to start with. So Labour has a number of policies that really benefit younger people specifically, but generally in the population for the cost of living. We've got free public transport for under 25s, free for children, half price for under 25s, free for children, free dental for under 30s, which we're bringing in. We've also raised the minimum wage for it's gone up $7 an hour since we first came in, which is really significant. GST of fresh fruit and vegetables and frozen fruit and vegetables, as has already been mentioned. But one thing that we won't be doing is implementing tax cuts for millionaires that will be inflationary, that will lock young people out of the housing market. And actually, I think if we look at some of the plans that ACT and National have for the public service, will leave a lot of people in this room without a job. A tax cut is no use if you don't have a job.
Awesome. Hinurewa?
Kia ora. So look, there's no question that cost of living right now is the biggest thing. You know, when you're out door knocking, talking to people on the street, they're doing it hard because they don't have enough money currently. Everything's expensive, so we know that, right? So National, if you're following us, our focus has been on lower inflation, grow the economy, ease the cost of living, and better paying jobs. And that's what we require. Right now, your age group, we have the concern and worry that you'll leave once you'll finish your degrees. We'll lose our skills and talent. If we don't increase our productivity, if we don't have better paying jobs for you, you'll leave the country, and we can't afford to do that. For whānau is that education, health, God, I don't know what I'm trying to say. Education, health is all interconnected. It doesn't come in isolation. So for me, currently, with our whānau and looking how we can support them, we need to put more back in them. Our tax relief policy is focused on, once again, putting more money back into the pockets of our whānau. I'm not going to go into the dollars behind that, but it's all about looking how we can ease the cost of living for our fat people. Sorry, did I miss something?
Can I respond to that?
Yeah.
Sorry, I missed what you
Yeah,
said.
no, I just
Damian,
made.
Disagree with me.
Yes, yeah. I was just making the point that the reason that you can't release the costings behind it is because for some reason they're secret and they haven't been made public, and it's
Don't have the figures on me.
they haven't been made public, and this is not a criticism of you. This is obviously your leadership has made a decision to not. No one has the figures because.
Do you have the figures?
Well, I have a report from 3 economists who say that the figures don't add up. That's what I have, which was announced today. Chloe, you might want to answer that too.
We've got Chloe and Damian.
For anyone who's interested in the background on this, I'd highly recommend watching the Q&A interview with Chris Luxon and Jack Tame from the weekend. It's 21 minutes going into the fact that the figures have not been released, but there are some pretty heroic assumptions in the National Party's tax policy, including projections around, for example, what would happen if they reopened foreign purchases of property here. Based on some written questions that I put forward to the Minister of Housing, we found that prior to the foreign buyers ban coming into effect, that in 2018, in the few years prior to 2019, that the average amount of properties that were sold offshore were in the realm of 800 to 1,100 per annum. And again, that's not taking into account the cost of those properties. The National Party would require there to be in excess of 1,500 properties sold in excess of $2 million in order to meet just that one component of how they would generate the revenue to pay for their tax cuts. Long story short, does not add up.
Damian, and then we're going to have to move on. Sorry, guys. Sorry.
So one thing that both National and ACT, I completely agree with them on, is this desire for more productivity in our economy. One thing I massively disagree with them on is the way that they think they are self-described right, free market capitalists. And yet they completely disavow the importance of the fact that New Zealand puts all of its capital into a non-productive asset. We put all of our money into property at a factor of 10 to 1. That is why New Zealand is still reliant on 100-year-old industry like chopping down trees and exporting milk. The Opportunities Party is the only party is one of the only parties with a clear plan to break New Zealand's over-reliance on property investment and actually grow the productive sectors of our economy.
Hinurewa, did you want to respond to any of that?
Yeah, I'll give like a quick...
Hold on. I'll give Hinurewa the right to reply and then we'll come back to you.
So the thing is, how we're going to go at each other's policies.
Do you want the microphone?
That's the whole idea, I think.
No, I'm not that way inclined. Your policies are your policies, and you're doing the very best you can for your communities, right? End of story. For us, National, these are our policies because we believe in them. We believe them just as much as you do. So I'm just going to say this. Right now, the question is about easing the cost of living for our communities because our communities are struggling. You've got to put money back into their pockets. We've got to look at the level of tax relief that we can give to them. So, you know, if you want to get down to the family levels, is our tax relief will be up to $100 per fortnight for an average income household and a family boost childcare tax credit of up to $150 per fortnight. There's even for the single person working, you can still get a tax credit up to about $50. So, you know, our policies are there to support you in your growth and development and sustainability long term. We have to. So if I'm going to take a dig at Labour, I'll say this. Right now, you're not serving our country well. You really aren't, you know? There you go.
Okay, I think we can go around in circles a lot on this topic, but we are going to move on because there's a lot of interesting things to discuss. But before we do move on, very, very serious question, and we'll start with Damian and we'll make our way across. It's a yes or no question. Pineapple on pizza. Yes or no?
For sure, totally, absolutely. Hawaiian's still the best pizza.
Yes or no? Pineapple on pizza?
Yes.
Totally.
Personally, no, but freedom of choice, sure.
Another insane idea like taxing the rich, absolutely, yeah.
100% no. Should be banned.
No, you guys got to get out and live.
Pineapple on pizza?
Pineapple on pizza.
Yes or no?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. And I'll hand it back over to Tatiana.
I love that we've got some very firm answers on that one. Speaking of rising temperatures in the room, the next question is about climate change. This is a really long preamble, so I'm very sorry, everybody. But Aotearoa has seen an enormous wave of support for the rapid transition needed to limit warming to 1.5 degrees. Tens of thousands of us took to the streets with the school strike for climate. There have been court cases, petitions, and people who have lost homes to climate-induced flooding, urging politicians to reduce emissions and support communities to prepare for a changed climate. The question is, what will your party do to rapidly reduce emissions and support frontline communities? I see Damian's ready with the mic, so you might as well start, bro.
Yeah, I was just resting it there. Climate change in New Zealand, it's pretty embarrassing at the moment. We are doing about as little as we possibly could, even on what we're measuring, let alone what we're not measuring. Our NDC, our nationally determined contribution, is not only like malfeasantly accounted for, it's a bald-faced lie, and everyone in the international community knows it is, but we're not even including our number one emitter, which is agriculture. The reason that we're doing that is because the ETS is the number one thing that we rely on to reduce our emissions, but we cut it at the knees constantly. We never really let it have a chance. It was actually set up to put more forestry onto New Zealand's land around 1990, and it's done a really good job of that. We've got the most Pinus radiata anywhere in the world, more than Canada, more than Russia. But that fact of having forestry offsets inside the ETS means that it's always, and heretofore has always been, cheaper to just plant more forest than to actually decarbonise industrial processes. So what do? We just plant more forest. And the actual long-term permanence of those forests is obviously questionable because their value is held in the wood, which eventually does get cut down. It's a terribly short-sighted way for us to have our economy, and the Opportunities Party would immediately separate forestry from the ETS. That is the way to actually begin to start decarbonising our processes. And, oh damn, I had a good bit. Okay, sweet.
So first and foremost, Māori are the first custodians and the first stewards of the whenua of our nation. Māwiwi whenua, Māwiwi tangata. We say if the land is unwell, our people will die. So our priority needs to be to look after and protect our taiao, our environment, for the future of our generations and our mokopuna. We have to, the damage is man-made, and we have to stop the polluters. 3 key things for us at Te Pāti Māori: stop it and ban it. You got to stop what's killing us. Secondly, we got to manage it. We need an adaptation plan for our whānau. We think about the floods, about the cyclone. You're talking to a frontliner, been frontlining in our community since COVID, and we haven't gone away. We never stayed home. We stood up and we've been supporting our local communities right across Tamaki Makaurau. And we've got to be able to invest and set up an emergency service for this, emergency relief fund. We've got to put money into that. Then we have to transform it. Our people aren't in the decision-making role for what's happening for our whānau hapu and iwi. We need to be involved in the decision-making, and another Māori authority needs to be set up for this, and that's what we want to do. There was no Māori civil defence. We set that up ourselves in the response for COVID, flooding and cyclones.
So 2 things. We need to do mitigation, which is to rapidly reduce climate changing emissions, but we also have to adapt. So in terms of mitigation, and again, with only a minute and a half, so if we look at our emissions profile nationally, Damian's absolutely right. Half of our emissions come from agriculture, and it's actually the only industry that isn't priced in the ETS, so we have to price agriculture, and we have to do that sensibly. And again, if we're talking about market economics and price signals, that is the only way that we can use the ETS in the way that is intended to be used. If we're to look locally at Tamaki Makaurau, but also actually all of our major cities, you'll see that the emissions profile here in Wellington and in Christchurch 50% transport. So that's where it's really critically important that we actually use the infrastructure and the assets that we already have, the roads that we already have, and start to implement a rapid transit network. That isn't going to require us to necessarily move immediately to light rail, although that is something which the Greens have proposed. If we were to go above ground with Auckland Light Rail as opposed to below ground as is presently proposed, we would save money, it would be faster to deploy, and it would be more accessible and with less embodied carbon. And for the money saved, we could also deploy light rail in Christchurch and Wellington. Hey presto. It also means massive co-benefits with regard to people's well-being and getting around. When it comes to adaptation, we have a process currently underway actually for a climate adaptation response bill, and James has recently just given the next iteration of the Environment Select Committee in the next Parliament the ability to go through a cross-party process, much like we did with the Zero Carbon Act.
Look, when it comes to climate change, it's a really difficult issue, but at the end of the day, we need a practical response. The ETS is absolutely crucial to our climate change response, and we need to pay a carbon price that is no higher than our top 5 trading partners, but also doesn't put us in a position where we actually can't do what we need to do. We need to pay a carbon price which reflects our obligations, but not so much that it puts our industries out of business. A lot of people on the stage, i.e. the Greens and the Māori Party, I think, want to put agriculture into the ETS. But the problem with putting agriculture into the ETS is you essentially put a huge price on our farmers and make it more unprofitable. If you make it more unprofitable, then that farming's just going to move overseas, right? Because the demand for protein worldwide isn't going away anytime soon. And if we're not fulfilling that demand, then some other country will. And the reality is that we actually make protein in this country pretty sustainably. So it's actually a good thing that we have a productive farming industry that serves people. Because if we push it overseas, probably someone's going to do it less sustainably than us. But I think that is what really is really unfortunate to see, is that, you know, we've got technology in this country right now that can actually reduce the emissions of our agricultural industry. It's called GMOs. But the Māori Party and the Green Party have been the two biggest parties in opposition of that technology, which could give the farmers the ability to reduce their CO2 emissions, but they don't support it. I think that at the end of the day, you need a practical climate change policy, because if you do too much, you make everyone in the country poorer, and if you do too little, you become an international pariah, because everyone needs to do their part. ACT says we've got a nice down-the-middle approach where we take both into account.
Kia ora, I see that Chlöe wants to give a response, so we will let Chlöe give a response, we will let Felix have right of reply, and then we will move back on. I'm thinking what we'll do actually is we'll just start moving from the end to the middle, and then from the end to the middle, and then you two can just duke it out every time.
I was just going to say, like, the introductory remarks were entirely contradicted by what followed, which is that the ETS is market economics and that we need to use that as the major tool for driving down emissions by putting prices on industries that are contributing climate-changing emissions. And then you heard that you don't want to put a price on the major contributor to our climate-changing emissions. So if I may, Felix, the point here is also that if we are to think about it with regard to GMOs solely, I'd tell you to actually go and talk to farmers, because if you're talking about the clean green image that we sell internationally, they are the ones, including in conversations with federated farmers, who are quite concerned about letting GMOs into the supply chain and the impact that that might have with regard to our exports. So there is actually a far more nuanced conversation here than the one that's currently being put forward, and I think that this is what's so gutting about how reductive these policy debates actually are. So I encourage you to go home and do your own research.
There is a more nuanced conversation, but your party is refusing to even have it, because your party has opposed GMO reform in this country for years.
That's not true. There's currently a review going on.
I didn't interrupt you at all. Please.
But you're lying.
So your party has consistently opposed GMO reform in this country for years, technology which could reduce our emissions. When it comes to the agricultural industry, the reality is that the agricultural industry makes up a huge portion of our exports and is very economically important to our future, to the wellness of our country, and to our economic productivity. If we were to include agriculture into the ETS, it would have very big consequences for our people in terms of tax take, in terms of exports, in terms of our incomes going forward. That's why we exclude it. It's really important we do that, because if we do include it into ETS, we're going to take a big hit economically, and that means that people are going to be poorer. We're not going to be able to afford the services we need. We're not going to be able to afford the education we need. We're not going to be able to afford the health they need. I know Chlöe talks a big game, but she doesn't acknowledge the economic consequences of her policy.
I don't ever say this, but he's lying and he doesn't know what he's talking about.
I'm not lying.
Like, look at it.
Thank you, Camilla.
Thank you. One of the first things that I did when I was elected to Parliament that I was really proud to do was participate in a vote to declare a climate emergency. And what we need to do now, and what we have been doing since then, is really taking the action to follow that up. There isn't a silver bullet to climate change. It's not GMOs. It's not one single thing. We need to take lots of different actions to make sure that we reduce our emissions, and I think James Shaw has been doing a great job as the Minister for Climate Change, and we have seen emissions in the last 3 years trending downwards. We know that's not enough. We have to keep doing the things that we're doing, and one of the things that we've announced recently is really a focus to 100% renewable energy, and we've announced several really big projects in that area to really make sure that New Zealand can have that 100% renewable electricity. We've also continued with programs which have been super successful, like the clean car discount. You would have seen yourselves being in Auckland how many more electric and hybrid cars and things on the road these days compared to before that scheme came in. Obviously, that's not enough on its own, but we don't want to have a car fleet which is polluting, and we need to keep up with these important mitigation methods. Of course, adaptation as well. Everyone who lives in Auckland knows that climate change isn't something that's in the future, it's here now. We've seen our houses flooded, we've seen businesses destroyed, we've seen people die because of the effects of climate change. And so we do have some members on this panel who say that we need to be careful, don't do too much. Well, I think the consequences of us not doing enough are not worth thinking about.
Are we... Oh, sorry, I thought Damian was wanting to respond. Did you want to respond? Okay, who's got the mic down that end? Chloe's got the mic.
To kind of try and put together
sabotaging me. So to try and knit together what everyone's kind of saying here, obviously it's an intractable problem almost. It's a predicament. It may actually not be solvable. But I don't think chasing 100% because it sounds great is actually a really good idea. It's we get a lot of diminishing returns from that last 12%. We're already at around 87 to 88. A lot of other countries could only dream of that level of renewable energy, and it may be better for the government to actually be investing in other forms of usage change, like to help to Felix's point, maybe getting our dairy farmers away from dairy. You talk about the demand for protein. Just relax, Felix. I haven't even said anything yet. So you talk about you are a pretty chill dude, I'll give you that. But you talk about demand for meat growing. The demand for alternative protein is growing 40 times faster. The reason New Zealand farmers find it difficult to change is because they're massively indebted to banks. Something that we could be doing to solve both things is actually enable land use changes from the government level.
Can I respond? I'll give you 20 seconds.
All right, there, and then we'll have Camilla's response.
I absolutely acknowledge Damian's point, and he's 100% right. It's not good that we rely on agriculture so much, but putting it ETS is putting the cart before the horse, because economically we rely on it right now in terms of our taxes and in terms of our productivity. And so if we just get rid of it without actually having the alternative in place before, we're just going to suffer as a country.
Kia ora, did you want to respond to any of that, Camilla?
Well, thank you for that contribution. I disagree, and I think it is a good goal to go to 100% renewable energy. We've seen lots of other countries who don't have the same type of reliance on renewable energy suffer really hugely in the cost of living crisis due to the fact that they're relying on fossil fuels in other countries. And I think the fact that we have renewable energy is a really great thing for New Zealand. So we should be focusing on that. But also, of course, that doesn't mean that we don't look at other things, and the Labour Party has also committed to including agricultural emissions and tackling that problem. It's been a lot of work. We've been working with the farming community together to try and solve this issue in He Waka Eke Noa. It's been tough, but we're 100% committed to including it, and that's for the simple reason that agricultural emissions do make up such a large part of our emissions in New Zealand, so we just can't have a scheme which doesn't include them.
Thank you. Over to you, Hinurewa.
I just need to say, apologies if I look like I'm wincing down here, but I had a fall yesterday on my coccyx, and it's damn well hurting. So that's why, if you're wondering why I'm looking like I'm in pain, it's not because of these guys, it's just because I'm just in agony. Yeah, partly because of you. So I just wanted to share that. But anyway, look, I'm really sorry. So look, National is absolutely committed to living on emissions targets. We know that the key drivers of emissions are agriculture, energy, transport and industry. National does want to embrace new technology so that we can ensure the infrastructure New Zealand needs to double renewable energy generation and will strengthen the economy. We just had 3 new policies released around climate change. One of them is to do with EV chargers, 10,000 EV chargers to be delivered so we can switch those sectors to clean electricity, because a third of the emissions reductions in New Zealand needs to, so we can reach by, net zero by 2050. Turbocharge new renewable power projects, including solar, wind and geothermal, because decisions on resource consents to be issued in 1 year and consents to be last 35 years. So, being able to put those policies forward are important for the country and for the future so that we can meet our emission needs. Sorry. Ka pai. Kia ora. Any comments? Oh, that makes a change.
Oh, interesting. No, you can keep that one. That one's for you. In the interest of time, I think I'll hand over to my friend Alan for the next question.
Cool. Thank you. The next question is around health and mental health. So health services are under huge strain. Health workers face extraordinary difficulty and stress at work with unsafe staffing levels. Our communities face long wait lists and disruptions to get quality and culturally appropriate care. The question is, how will you strengthen the health system? And perhaps we'll start with you, Hinurewa, this time.
Yeah, sure. So I'm just going to read from, we've put out one of our, how we're going to get our country back on track in our pledge card. Thanks very much, Camille. And so we know right now that for health, cutting health waiting times is really important. We need to train more doctors, nurses and midwives and give Kiwi access to more cancer treatments. So that's one of our key pledges to the country. When it comes to mental health issues, we also know that we need to look at relocation grants for our nurses up to 10,000 to move here. We know that we need to extend the free breast cancer screening to women aged up to 74 from 69. We need to increase the health budget in each and every year so that we reinstate health targets so we can get to see how the health system is performing. And we have a dedicated mental health minister. So, you know, that's something that National has committed to so that we will enable New Zealanders to get timely access to care by setting up a mental health innovation fund to help boost community providers, NGOs like, you know, Mike King's Gumboot Friday, which made a real difference into Kiwis in need.
Camilla?
Thank you. I want to acknowledge the health workforce and the work that everyone did during a really difficult time during the pandemic, and the pressures that it put on the health system were immense. So I think we're all grateful for the hard work that was done. I think we do, and we've acknowledged, and you can see that we do have a number of vacancies for health professionals in New Zealand, and that is creating a strain on our health workforce, not only for the people who are nurses or doctors or work in health practices or hospitals, but also for people who are wanting services. And so an announcement that we've made this week has been to increase the number of doctors that we train in New Zealand, and so that will be through the medical school here at Auckland University and also at Otago University to increase the number of doctors trained here by 335 over the next, I think it's by 2027. And one of the parts of this question was, how do we ensure culturally appropriate care? Well, obviously we still want to bring in overseas trained doctors as well. We have brought in around about 500 in the last calendar year or 13 months, so a significant number of people are coming over as well to assist, but I still think that it's important that we train doctors here as well, and that might be for the reason that we do need, I think, a wide range of people represented in our medical workforce and our doctors. We know that people have better health outcomes if their problems are understood and if that person has an understanding or is from that culture that person might be.
Yeah, I think, you know, everyone on the stage is going to say that health is a huge problem in New Zealand and that our hospitals are really struggling, and that we're also struggling to retain the essential staff that our hospitals need, the doctors and the nurses. So I'll really briefly go over sort of ACT's policy in this area. One thing we think is really important is to increase the GP capitation payment by 13%. So that's the payment that GP clinics receive for enrolling clinics. We think that makes GP clinics more sustainable, and having those frontline GP clinics continue to be available to people is really important in making sure that we have a sustainable healthcare system, because if we can catch more of those, you know, health issues early on, then we're actually going to do better as a country. We also need to subsidise more elective surgeries. We've got a huge elective surgery backlist in this country. I think it's like 300,000 elective surgeries. We need to make sure we subsidise more of those so that we can take the pressure off our hospitals. We also need to get more private investment in our hospitals. The reality is if private companies are willing to build us hospitals, I'm not going to say no, and I don't think any government should say no to that, because more hospitals means more rooms, it means we can have more surgeries, it means we've got more space for our people, it means we've got better infrastructure. But in terms of mental health specifically, ACT's got a really good policy on mental health. We want to establish a mental health commissioning agency that would connect people with mental health providers, that being community providers. It would be a frontline service, and so if you've got a mental health problem or you've got some sort of need, you approach the agency, you tell them what's wrong, you tell them what you would like, you tell them what you'd prefer in terms of a community provider, and they connect you with that community provider. Because the reality is...
So, I mean, we just have to increase pay and conditions in our healthcare system at every single level, from our nurses through our doctors, our midwives, our practitioners, and the way that we do that is, again, with a fairer tax system, engaged with, and also actually for our allied health workers too. On the point of kind of the pathways into health, both physical health and mental health, and how we can support that workforce growing, this is where paid placements are really critical. So I have spent the past few years really trying to make student issues a issue for Parliament to care about, and an Education Workforce Select Committee tried to get an inquiry into paid placements and the situation with postgraduate stipends. We only managed to get one of those two around postgraduate stipends, but nonetheless we've kind of tried to put this issue on the map. And not only paid placements but also universal student allowance would mean that more students are able to actually go through those pathways to getting trained in the first place and not dropping out, as we've seen our People's Inquiry into Student Wellbeing, which tells us that 2/3 of students regularly cannot afford the basics. When it comes to mental health, the Greens actually initially put out the Minister for Mental Health policy back in 2017. It continues to be our policy because we need to focus on precisely delivery in the mental health space. But as I was alluding to before with the Piki pilot program, we have some incredibly clear ways that we can build up the workforce that doesn't require people going through a tertiary level qualification.
So Te Pāti Māori want to address the inequalities and improve the Māori health and well-being of our people, and it's our response to the systematic failure of the health system, and we know that because our people die a decade earlier than non-Māori, and we need more investment. So 25% increase investment into Te Aka Whaiora. It needs to continue, and we will need more investment going into that. We need affordable healthcare, primary healthcare. Free primary health care and free dental care to those that earn $60,000 or less. Free delivery of medication to those whānau in the same income bracket. That'll benefit 3 million people. Māori health, we need to invest more in Māori health funding and our partners, whānau ora, Māori health providers. I oversee a GP clinic. I work for Hinurewa Marae, I'm the CEO. I see the health and well-being of our people every day and the dire straits that they're in. We can't afford to remove an authority like the Māori Health Authority. We need to continue to invest in it. It's been underinvested. It needs more money. We want to be able to set up a separate Māori Health ACC authority to be able to deliver more services to our people. Mental health needs more investment as well, and we want to put 500 million into the investment of a kaupapa Māori mental health authority.
Okay, we'll go to Chlöe to respond, and then we'll give Takutai the right of response.
Response doesn't always have to be antagonistic. So just because it was raised, the Greens also have a plan for universal free dental, and we're stoked to see that the Labour Party has followed in our footsteps, but it's capped it at 30 years old. Turns out people over 30 years old also have teeth, or don't. So I'd like to get towards universal dental, and we can pay for it with a wealth tax. We want to fix ACC as well. If you're looking at the way the ACC is currently operating, it's not as it was intended to, and we're seeing massive discrepancies with people who are disabled by virtue of birth versus by virtue of accident. So we can fix that again with properly and adequately resourcing it. The other thing that I'd say to Felix's point earlier around a commissioning agency to be established for sake of doing these what are called RFPs out to community members to be able to set up these services themselves. It's already happening in Te Whatu Ora, and that's happening by virtue of the work that I've been working on actually with Minister Dr. Aisha Varel. We do and are establishing those community supports at present.
Camilla, did you want to respond to that?
Quick one. Just kia ora, e hoa, for your slightly sarcastic acknowledgement of our policy. We do want to eventually have universal dental. We just need to take it in small steps because of the affordability, and also importantly, the capacity within the workforce. So we've committed to training more dentists to allow that to happen. Unfortunately, even if we wanted to implement it, even if we had a wealth tax, we can't. A wealth tax doesn't invent dentists. So unfortunately, we will have to take it in steps. But the goal is the same.
Not to retread, ground, but Labor promised 100,000 homes in 2017. It didn't happen. Labor's promising dental care for everybody under 30. It's not going to happen. We don't have the dentists in this country, and they don't have the money to do it. I'd be very sceptical of anything that these two promise. Chloe says she'll pay with it with wealth tax. A wealth tax won't work. It's going to increase our overall tax take and make us all poorer as a country.
Okay. Yep. Damian. We haven't forgotten about you.
It's almost like, oh man. You just have to look at the economic history of this country. Like, it's seriously,
Okay.
we're gonna have an ideological debate here, but the gist of it is that the economy is this thing which we all get to decide how we want to figure out how we're going to play along and work together to.
Okay, Damian, we're going to go to Damian.
30
Thank you,
seconds.
Felix and Chlöe.
Oh, shit, I've forgotten what I was going to say now. So, yeah, it's a good idea. We actually have something similar. So, the Opportunities Party, one of our, we obviously focus on health, just like it seems every other party does. There seems to be a lot of unanimity here. It's an issue that we know we need to fix. One of the problems in New Zealand is that we take 92% of central government's money, its revenue, its tax take, from those who can least afford to pay it. If you earn money by wages in New Zealand, you pay tax on every dollar you earn, and if you spend that money, you pay tax on every dollar you spend. One of the most significant things that this election campaign gives us the opportunity to discuss is why the fuck is it like that? It can actually change. If we broaden our tax base, we can fund adequately the infrastructure of government and public services. We desperately need to continue that discussion, but very quickly on health specifically, there's two things you can do. One, you stop people needing to go to hospitals. To do that, you need to improve the health of our homes. That is a big topic, and I've only got, 16 seconds. So the other lever that you need to start pulling is you need to accelerate postgrad medical programs for clinical and science graduates. You need to increase placements at university, and you need to strengthen workforce retention, which is obviously fairer wages and safer hours.
Takutai, did you want to respond to any of that? Because I acknowledge that the question started with you. All good if not, but just giving you the opportunity if you wanted to.
At the end of the day, we need more investment into Māori health. It's our people that are dying.
Cool. And then I think Hinurewa had something to say.
How many of you are familiar with whānau ora? There we go. The reason to bring up whānau ora, because for me this is a fundamental policy, bit of legislation that needs to have better investment. Whānau ora is a centric approach to working with our whānau and taking a collective approach to their development and sustainability. The thing about whānau ora is that it's not done in isolation. So Damian, you mentioned about family. That's about taking your family. Mental health today is not done in isolation. It has to be done with the whānau, bottom-up approaches. It has to be done with a whole series of wraparound services. Mental health is about building resilience, and whānau ora does that. So I'm looking, for national, that is a foundation policy of the National Party, which was done in accord with the Māori Party back in 2014. Because Tariana Turia used to say to us, the social welfare system does not fit our people at all. That was a good way to finish.
All right.
The only problem is with National is that they don't want to work with the Māori Party.
Well, that could change.
It's a reasonably big.
We just don't know.
That's not what the leader of the National Party
But
has
I'm
said.
not the leader. You just don't know.
All right, and on that note, we will move on, and I'll hand it over to Tatiana for the next question.
I think Damian never actually got to give his substantive response. Did you have anything further to add to what you'd already responded with?
Me?
Damien, yeah.
Oh, I could say heaps, but no, it's all good.
All good?
Moved on.
Okay,
That's
cool.
reasonable
That's
place
great.
to
I'll actually give this back because now I have two. Here we go.
Actually, I will say one. It's Te Wiki o Te Reo. Whakatauki is something that I've been reading quite a lot of over the last month and a half, and there's one that just keeps jumping out at me, Tangata akawana e te whare. Tūranga ki te marae e tau ana. And what that means is that a person who is well nourished and looked after and cared for at home stands collected on the marae. We treat health in this country as an ambulance at the bottom of the cliff. We think of it as resourcing for the end of people's lives, not resourcing for when they're born and making it healthy for them to live and not accumulate a whole bunch of chronic disorders that they eventually pound them later on. So investment in New Zealanders' housing is the surest way to invest and improve health outcomes.
Kia ora koutou, thank you.
That was it. Was I supposed to say more?
Where were we? We're on to question 5 around fair and equal pay, but actually I think we've been taking things a bit too seriously for a little while. So, quick question. You are now in charge of an elephant. You cannot give your elephant away. You cannot sell your elephant. What do you do with it?
Just have a fucking good time. I'm on an elephant. Just go wherever.
Anyone else?
Let it go home. Doesn't belong here.
Join the circus.
I think that its needs need to be met, and it needs to be, fed.
There are 5 needs under the Animal Welfare Act.
Exactly. There are probably regulations which apply, which we of course comply with. Yeah. Do you have a thought?
An elephant.
Yeah.
The elephant in the room.
That was the underlying joke, yeah.
All right, let's go to equal pay.
All right, yeah, that...
I'll start.
That light in the mid, yeah, I see we're keen. So, again, long preamble whānau. Fair and equal pay. Pay equity claims are a way to make sure women are paid fairly for the work that they do, and to correct the injustice of work that has traditionally been done by women being paid less than comparable work that has mostly been done by men. Claims go through a thorough and detailed process to calculate the extent of undervaluation in order to correct it accurately. We also know that this is just one element of pay discrimination, which includes, but is not limited to, ethnicity and disability pay gaps. The question is, what are you going to do to combat pay discrimination? And Camilla, since you're so keen, I guess you can go first.
I'm very keen on this subject. It's probably one of my favourite things to talk about, and I just want to also pay tribute to all of you as members of the PSA, because the PSA has been one of the major unions taking equal pay claims, and that's been resulting in remedying historical injustices for female-dominated workforces. So well done, all of you, for taking that leadership role in that way. Of course, as the question stated, that's not enough. We know that there's a persistent gender pay gap in New Zealand, and what's more, an even larger ethnicity pay gap, which is also concerning, discriminatory and wrong. So we need to do more. One of the things that we've recently announced is pay transparency measures, which will come in, and we're looking to include ethnicity pay gaps in that. If we do that, we'll be one of the first countries in the world to acknowledge the systemic issue, which has been resulted in lower pay for certain groups in New Zealand society, and in fact, I'm sure other societies around the world as well. So we need to do that work. We also need to continue with our equal pay work. That's incredibly important. We know we've got a number of settlements and claims that are ongoing. We need to make sure that that bargaining continues and that process continues, and we're able to settle those. And then we just need to make sure that we're constantly testing and making sure that we're not thinking that all of our work in gender pay is done, because we need to always be making sure that those discriminatory practices don't exist, and making sure that we're aware of that as well. Also this week, I think, is it this week or next week is Suffrage Day? Next week. So incredibly important day for New Zealand.
Great, shall we come this way to Hinurewa?
Yeah, look, we support pay equity and pay parity, especially for those women in the workforce who are in particular sectors. We supported in 2017 the pay equity settlement. As to whether there's negotiations going on, I'm sorry, I'm not privy to that and I don't know, but I know that if National gets into government, we will continue to work on this particular area, which is very important to all women, especially to me, as we celebrate on the 19th of September, Women's Suffragette.
Kia ora, shall we kick it down the other end to Damian?
Chloe's always sabotaging me with the news, but I don't know. God, Chloe, I've got things to say. So, pay transparency, obviously critical. Also being more aggressive with... I talked to Natalia Albert, who's our deputy leader, today. She's an expert and she's rewritten everything I wanted to say and basically tuned it up because she's smarter than I am. And it's really hard to read my writing. So we need to be more aggressive around attraction, retention and promotion into high-income, high-power roles. Salary transparency in the public service gets more and more opaque the higher you go up. So the requirements for more senior roles are harder to discern and advertise for, and more cryptic for why they're hired. And that lack of transparency is something that the Opportunities Party, and particularly our governance policy, is trying to address directly.
Takutai? Fantastic. Yeah, of course, Te Pāti Māori, we're all about supporting our whānau hapu iwi. We're all about ensuring that people earn what they deserve to earn. And one of the biggest things I love about Te Pāti Māori is that we think about our people, which I haven't really heard a lot about here, about people and about the rights of people and what they deserve, valuing people. It's been about a lot of transactional stuff, but I haven't heard people talk about people, valuing people, caring for people, looking after people. And it's one of the things I love about Te Pāti Māori. It is about whānau hapu iwi. We want to support, of course, pay equity, especially within our teachers, especially in our nurses, those that are doing the work to look after our people. We want to make sure that they are paid and that they are paid pay equity. So yeah, that's why I'm thinking about pay at the moment. I used to work for a man. He was a union man, Sid Jackson, well known in Māoridom and in Māori unions. And he always said to me, takutai, whatever you do in life, make sure you look after your people and your workers. And that's what I do as an employer of 50 staff at Hinurewa Marae. I make sure that my kaimahi are looked after.
Kia ora. I'd say to that point again, to this kind of philosophical toing and froing that we've been having, that's kind of precisely the point that I've been trying to make about what this thing called the economy is that we are creating. And we very strongly and fundamentally believe as the Greens that the economy is there to serve us, as opposed to us serving this notion of rules and regulations that we've created called the economy, which consistently sees wealth aggregate in fewer and fewer hands. So coming to the question around fair and equal pay, we've obviously been massive supporters of the mahi and actually have played a really active role in it, particularly in the last term, with the Honourable Julianne Genter as the Minister for Women. She actually did a lot of the work on particularly the pay transparency piece, which is only now finally getting that cab getting off the rank. But there is also, in my engagement with NZNO, the nurses union, some weird bureaucratic hold-up in the process of settling and the payout for the pay equity settlement. So I'm not quite sure what that's about. So that needs to be paid out far quicker. Yeah, so some districts have it and some districts do not. So again, I think that that's a matter of need to focus on those areas where that rollout has not been adequate and has not been universal and therefore has been fundamentally unfair. And the other thing I'd say is don't abolish the Ministry for Women, as this guy wants to do.
Look, in terms of me and Chlöe having a philosophical difference, that's putting it lightly. At the end of the day, the economy is important. It's important because it should serve the people, and that's what ACT believes. But unfortunately, you can't have welfare without wealth, and you can't have the things we need without an economy that works. That's why, maybe it seems a bit harsh, but I refer back to the economy so much because it's so important. One thing I'll also say before I get into my answer, if you do get the chance, you should check out Camilla's Wikipedia page. She's done some amazing work in this area in terms of the gender pay gap. But my understanding is that there are many reasons why we have a gender pay gap, and I'll just touch on two of those reasons. So one of them is that we don't reward a lot of professions that women traditionally do quite well. One thing that I'm really proud of ACT doing is actually paying teachers more. ACT would pay teachers more through a $250 million Teaching Excellence Fund, and ultimately that's going to reward teachers in our community, a lot of them which are women, and I think that's really important. But also, I think that one reason we also have a gender pay gap is women are discouraged from undertaking, fields in STEM and fields in, engineering, traditionally high-paid roles. I think it's really important that we as a society encourage women to undergo those roles, and slowly over time we can hopefully eliminate the gender pay gap. Thank you.
Any responses?
I would It's one of my favourite subjects. So just in terms of, I mean, there are a few other things. I do have a members bill on pay secrecy as well, which is actually something that's in a number of different countries, where a lot of contracts actually say if you talk about your pay to your colleagues, then you might be able to be disciplined by your employer, which I think is terrible. So my members bill would actually get rid of that, which I think is really good. It's one of the recommendations that came out of an inquiry that we did on the Education Workforce Committee into pay transparency. Another one that I think is really interesting is making pay rates, publishing pay rates for all jobs. So, you know, when you go on Trade Me or when you're looking for work, it's really difficult to know what the pay range is and whether you should apply for that job or whether it's within your, if it's the type of pay that you'd like to see. And so I think that would be a really good way of increasing pay transparency and also equity, and also making sure that a lot of the gender pay gap actually comes from a starting salary. Women, when they go into work, they're paid less than their male counterparts. If we can make sure there's transparency about starting salaries, that women aren't going in and for some reason getting paid less because of experience or some other reason, discrimination, then I think that would also assist. So yeah, lots of work to do in this area, but lots of policies that will help.
Can I just add that one thing about Māori partners, they actually want to increase the salary bands of their workers. However, we don't get the same funding as mainstream providers. So Te Whatu Ora gave their nurses a pay increase. Well, we want to increase the pay for our Māori nurses that work in the community. They do just as much mahi. They are the front line, and that they are the staff that see our people on the daily before you get to the hospital, and which is what we've been talking about here, that they are so important. But we don't get the same funding, and our community nurses never got access to the pay rise.
Kia ora, thank you, whānau. Nope. Yep. Okay, moving on. Over again to my friend Alan.
Cool. Just before we move on, a couple of people mentioned Suffrage Day, so this is my opportunity for another shameless plug. AUSA is hosting Suffrage Week next week, so check it out. Thank you. Cool. Tertiary education. As the president of AUSA, this is a personal favourite of mine. The question reads, and it's quite simple really, do you support the decision to increase tertiary sector funding by 128 million? Why or why not? Who would like to start? Chlöe? Yep.
Yeah, well, my contribution is yes, I do, because I think it was the right thing to do, and it's important to invest in our tertiary sector. Are we doing it out of order? Or?
Just whatever, yeah.
Cool. That part of the evening. So the first thing that I would say is worked really closely with the Honourable Jan Tinetti, who's the Minister of Education, on getting to that place, which was not only the gap filler of the 128 million for tertiary education providers, but also for a long-term review of the tertiary education funding model, because we've known for a really long time that is not fit for purpose and it's not working. I'd actually done some work last term with Chris Hipkins on this, but then obviously COVID-19 happened. One really important thing to know, though, about the 128 million is that is not new and additional funding. That's just money that actually was initially allocated to the tertiary education sector on the basis of what was projected to be student enrolment figures. But based on the decline, that money was then not allocated to those tertiary education institutions. So it's simply a reallocation of the funding that had already been allocated in the budget prior. So ultimately, we haven't fixed the issue, which is the underfunding desperately of our tertiary education institutions. So we need to go a lot further and a lot faster. Something which I've been pushing the Minister on when it comes to the terms of reference for that tertiary education funding review is for the voice of staff and students to be front and centre.
I'm not sure how to say this, but basically I completely agree. I think the tertiary funding model is largely broken. We would also advocate for the resolution of the review. Like anything, that needs to be balanced to support those who are currently working in that sector, though. So in the sense that I support that money going to the sector so that we can continue to employ as many people in it as possible, those professors, etc., and that they didn't have a say in that broken funding model. Mm-hmm. And so their inclusion in a new, better funding model would be good, and yes, it should be improved. So possibly no, as in throwing bad money after good, but obviously it was a good idea, so yes, I do agree, yeah.
Te Pāti Māori didn't support the increase in the funding because we said it needed more. Yeah.
Agreed. Yeah. It's been desperately underfunded for decades.
Look, it's tertiary funding is somewhat of an unfortunate issue because of the state of our economy at the moment. Recently, the government opened up its books in pre-fu, and what's been uncovered is that we're over $100 billion in debt. And if you accept that we as a country have a limited amount of money, we have to be really careful with how we spend that money so that we don't add to inflation, and also so that we can continue to fund our core public services. At the moment, we're just not in the state to continue to give that $129 million to the tertiary sector. And I think at the end of the day, a lot of parties here talk about, for example, making, tertiary education free, and that's not something that the ACT Party supports either, because at the end of the day, the funding model for our tertiary institutions needs to be sustainable. And if you go to a university and you earn a bit more, we think it's actually okay to say, well, if you're earning a bit more after university, maybe you should pay some of it back in the form of a student loan. So that's not something I support.
Yeah?
Yep, Chloe?
Cool. So tertiary education was largely free in this country until the 1980s. You were also paid to go to university through the bursary. That means that it was a political decision to change that, and that was an ideological and political decision on the basis of user pays, as Felix has alluded to. I start from the proposition that education is a public good. When you walk into a building or walk across a bridge and it does not collapse, you are benefiting from somebody else's education. The fact that my appendix nearly burst a few years ago and I did not die means that I benefited from somebody else's education. The fact that all of you in this room right now can hear and understand me means that we are benefiting from other people's education. That means that when the education of one person, when we educate one person rather, we are not solely educating that one person, but we're educating an entire community. So if we're to talk about education as a public good, and actually in the context of the productivity challenges that we were talking about before, then we need to see that investment as necessary and long-term to ensure the good of our country, our cities, our towns, and our people ultimately.
Look, education is absolutely a public good, and every year the taxpayer gives millions of dollars. Thank you. Education is absolutely a public good, and every year the taxpayer fronts up thousands and millions, billions of dollars for students to go to university. And on average, those who go to university will earn a lot more than those who don't go to university. They gain an economic advantage. And we think that at the end of the day, if you gain an economic advantage, we think it's okay that actually you pay for some of that economic advantage to go back into the system to repay and continue the sustainability of our educational institutions. If we have student loans, then that means more money goes back to the universities because we're paying more back for the education we received. And I think that actually is a great deal because it means our educational institutions are financially sustainable in the future. Again, Chloe's solution is just to throw money at the problem. And if you believe you can do that forever, then fine. That's a great way to run the country. But actually, if you believe that there are limitations on our financial system, then it's a terrible way of running the country.
It's what fiscal policy inherently is, which is what governments do. They do tax and spend. Governments of all stripes do that, and they make choices.
And the question is how much we should tax and spend.
And they make choices. And as Felix was alluding to, it does need to be paid back, and we can choose to pay for it back through a fairer tax system, or we can choose to put immense amounts of debt on students. And I mean, go and talk to teachers, nurses, social workers, midwives, anybody who has to study a tertiary qualification in order to do the profession that they do, and ask those frontline people who are currently fighting for better paying conditions whether they did that tertiary qualification for sake of the glamour or the money that they would make at the end of the day. We need those professions, and we need to ensure that people can get into those professions and get those tertiary qualifications, and the way that we do that is through a fairer tax system that ensures that there are no barriers to people getting those qualifications and working in those critical workforces that we've all alluded to. The final thing that I just wanted to say is that the literal definition of a public good is, and I quote, a commodity or service that is provided without profit to all members of society, either by the government or by a private individual or organisation. So Felix said free education.
The point is that education is a public good, but it's only publicly good so long as it benefits the taxpayer. There are many minimum wage workers around this country who chose not to go to university. There are many apprentices and all sorts of people who decided not to study, and they're earning a lot less in the future than the people who did decide to study. And if we're going to make sure that people can afford our future, if we can make sure that our universities can continue to operate, then actually we need to make sure that we adequately fund it. And this is just fantasy land, being like, oh, we'll just tax the rich until
like
there's
they do
no
in
money
Germany
left in this country.
Okay, I do want to leave some time for questions from the audience, but Hinurewa, did you have anything to say on this topic?
I'm so enjoying the debate between these two down there. But look, it's no surprise that this bailout occurred, and it wouldn't have been needed if there hadn't been such a significant delay to the borders opening to allow international students. So, National is committed to ensuring that you as students can study, that the cost of living is affordable for you, that we get more housing built for young people, like built-to-rent projects, and attract more international students to get our revenue into our universities. So there you go.
Awesome. Kia ora. Awesome. We are going to probably, did you want to respond, Camilla? I think you responded at the start, correctly? Yeah. Cool. All good? Awesome. We'll move on to questions from the audience. Thank you for those of you who have submitted questions. I'll hand it over to Tatiana.
Yeah, kia ora. So we are a little bit over time, so I'm going to try and squeeze in as many as possible. There is one common theme that has come up here around, we've stressed the importance of engaging young people in politics and making sure that we're canvassing them for their views. The question really is, what are you or your party doing to make sure that you are hearing young voices and getting the information straight from the sources?
Well, look, I've got the microphone, so I'll start off with that. So every political party has some form of youth. We have Young Nationals, and that Young Nationals is a strong body. We have a president, right. Oh, sorry. I thought someone was laughing at me already. I said, God, that was so quick. But having young people in political organisations is so important. It doesn't matter what your political leanings are towards, is that you actually are part of the system and that that your voice is heard and representation. So, for National, we have Young Nationals. I'm delighted to have them. They work really hard. They lobby. They advocate. They are our voice and they keep us honest and progressive. So if, as you sit here listening, some of us resonate, some of us won't. But I can't stress high enough how important it is to be part of the political system so that you understand about legislation, regulation and policy and how to affect change. For myself, I was a Young National, and my father was a former Māori Vice President of the National Party, as was my uncle. So, perhaps some few of you are confused why Māori would vote National, but for me it's about tino rangatiratanga. It's about self-development, self-reliance, autonomy. It's about mana and how I build the mana for my whānau and for future generations. Kia ora.
Kia ora. I first got involved in politics when I was a teenager. I was on my board of trustees, I was on my youth council, I was involved in student politics, I was co-president of NZUSA, I had a lot to do with AUSA. Shout out to AUSA, I feel like I've been talking about the PSA all night, but awesome organisation. Been through some really tough times, but always do an amazing job representing students at Auckland University. So I have a really strong belief that young people know what they're talking about and have amazing ideas and need to be given the opportunities to just lead in their own way. I really admire the work that Make It 16 has done. An incredible campaign from that group of people, and I think the result of it has actually been maybe not everything that Make It 16 wanted in terms of lowering the voting age for general elections, but having a bill in Parliament now to lower the voting age to 16 for local body elections I think is a fantastic start and something that I think will make a huge difference, even in the way that local body politicians engage with young people. I'm sure will change, and I wish it wasn't this way. I wish that people engage no matter what your age, but really big advocate for engaging with young people and empowering them to do their own work.
Yeah, surprise, surprise, I was involved in politics at a very young age at university. I enjoyed it a lot. I enjoy talking to young people about all sorts of issues that they're facing, and I think it's really important that we address many of the problems that I think are very unique to what young people are facing in this country. I think that the ACT Party has a very good platform and we have a very good pitch to young people. And that's why we talk about productivity in this country so much. That's why we talk about the median wage gap between Australia and New Zealand so much, is because you know, I really want New Zealand to work for young people, and I really want New Zealand to work for our future. I want people to actually stay in this country and not just go to Australia. I talk to a lot of my friends, and they're thinking about going to Australia because the reality is you just earn so much more in that country. And so when I'm talking to young people about why they should vote ACT and why they should get involved in ACT, I talk about productivity, I talk about the median wage, and I think it's a really good pitch.
Again, I'd encourage everybody to go and look at the party's policies, because we're not going to get into the details of them and whether they're actually going to fulfil on the promises that all of us are making to you tonight, but you guys can go home and do precisely that. Despite being a massive nerd when I was younger, everyone's talking about student politics days, I was never involved in student politics. I was, however, involved in the 1995 BFM for 4.5 years, baby. And what that did, I did stand for the Mayoralty in 2016 when I left Babe, but my point is that if you're to talk about how young people engage with politics, we have to talk about the entire ecosystem, which is like actually media that is meaningful, relevant, and delivers for young people. And I could go down a massive kind of tangent here about how when we were initially looking at the TVNZ-RNZ merger, I just proposed that instead they should increase funding for the SRN, the Student Radio Network. But nonetheless, if we are to talk about removing the other barriers that exist for engaging in politics, we need to ensure that young people have the resources to do precisely that. So that means civics education, but it also means, again, things like I was alluding to before, removing the youth wage, etc. So many more things I could say.
It's that time of the night.
It's that time.
Well, if you look at the list of Te Pāti Māori, over half of them are rangatahi. And we've made a really clear stance around the future as rangatahi, and they're our succession plan. And we're grooming them and growing them to be unapologetically Māori. Mm-hmm. And this is for an Aotearoa hau, for our future generations and for our mokopuna. And we're not through colonisation our people have become apolitical, but we are not apolitical people. We are very political in our stance for our rights. Mm-hmm. And we believe in rangatahi, and we can see that because Hana is going to be the youngest Māori MP ever to make it into Parimata. And that's our stance for rangatahi and grooming the future generation.
Kia ora. Obviously, youngies have the most skin in the game with regards to the decisions that are made that affect their future. The Make It 16 campaign is something that the Opportunities Party agrees with completely. Some of the other things that the Electoral Commission came out with earlier this year we would also agree with, like the reduction of the ridiculous MMB 5% threshold, which means you've got to get somehow 150,000 people to listen to you and then agree with you and then change their mind from what they've always done, which is very difficult to do. In fact, it's basically never been done before. There was one isolated case, but the 16 is a no-brainer, and I don't understand why I didn't know that it had been broken out into local only. Maybe that's just so that they can have sort of like a wonderfully happy, good-feeling bill later on. But the surest way to get people involved in politics is to enable them to participate. And the surest way to get them to care about politics is to enable them to participate. And then the surest way to ensure that someone's going to vote next time is if they voted last time. So, yep, 16, no-brainer, absolutely.
Just a quick response to that. I think the reason that we did the local body elections is because that's what we could get through Parliament to change our electoral laws. We need to have a majority of, I think it's at 75%. We didn't have those numbers, so we weren't able to do that, and that's the reason why that didn't happen.
Sorry, Camilla. Chlöe just made a face at me. It was very funny.
Yeah, sorry, I'm getting the nod from our person back here about whether or not we're going to do one more question or two more questions, but it has been a long night and I think we're getting tired. So our last question from the audience, well, rather our second question from the audience, relatively straightforward question, not necessarily a simple question. How many properties, including rentals, do you all own and help manage?
I own one. I bought my place on Waiheke Island in 2019. I'm pretty sure it's the cheapest house that's been sold on Waiheke Island for 5 years. It's taken up 4 years of my life to make it habitable for me, my partner Maggie, and my 3-year-old son. And I don't want anyone else to have to do that shit. That's why I'm here.
Well, I represent the majority of people here in Tamaki Makaurau, especially Māori, I don't own any properties at all.
Yeah, there's only one thing that our parliament has more of than guys called Chris, and it is landlords. And if you want, just, I don't know, like in all other areas it'd be called a conflict of interest. But me and my, it might say something about the way that power works. Recently me and my wife had the good fortune of buying an apartment. So we have an apartment in Auckland Central with a huge mortgage. But I still want house prices to come down.
No, I have, it's no surprises, but I have no property, but I hope and I aspire to own one day.
No, I'm actually very impoverished, to be honest.
Well, yeah, community law, that's good work.
Community law doesn't matter.
I own a house with my husband in Auckland, which I live in with my husband and my 3 children, and we also have a masonette that we lived in London when we lived there, which is a leasehold property, has a 1,000-year lease, so it's, not a very good investment, but we own that and we have tenants living in there in London.
I have 2 properties, one in Te Taitokoro, where my tānei lives, in our home, and I have one here in Auckland. And can I say that when I look at most of my whānau, they have a property, but they've worked hard to get there, to own those properties. Yeah, kia ora.
Kia ora koutou, thank you. With that, we will bring ourselves to a close. I would like to give you all the opportunity to have just 1 minute to give us a closing summary, a closing pitch, whatever you want. We'll start with Hinurewa and we'll work our way down. Do a final pitch.
Yeah, final pitch. Well, look, I'm standing for National in the Tamaki Makaurau seat for Māori. It's the first time representation. I don't know how many Māori are in this particular audience because you're a very cross community. But yeah, I'm there to provide representation for the Māori voice in 2 decades. This election is very much about choice. It's about what is going to get our country back on track. For us, it's around easing the cost of living. It's about improving our incomes and ensuring that we can get the inflation and get inflation down and get some growth happening within this country. I come from an arts, culture and heritage background, so I want to ensure that my communities are looked after. I want to make sure that there is the devolution of services where we're putting the services back into our local communities, regional development, and that our frontline services have the investment that they required to progress. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Well, first of all, thank you so much for organising this forum. Thank you to the PSA, thank you to AUSA, thank you for everyone for being here tonight. This is a really important election. We sometimes say this every election, that this is the most important election, but I definitely think that this, compared to many other elections, is really significant because we've got 2 very stark choices about the type of government that you might have. And only a Labour-led government will stand up for the work that you do as public servants and commit to making sure that we retain the core public services that we all depend on in health and education and all of the other services that we know make a big difference to delivery. And we don't call them backroom bureaucrats, we call them public servants who work for our communities. We understand that it's been a really tough time for people. We know that we're following from a global pandemic. I think the Labour government did a really amazing job with making sure that we saved thousands of lives, but we know that that came at a cost to our community in terms of the lockdowns, especially that we had in Auckland. So vote for Labour if you want a stable government that looks after our public services.
The way politics works at this university is every 3 years politicians will come down here and they'll sort of promise the student body the world. They're going to say they're going to make education free, they're going to build housing, they're going to make rent affordable, they're going to make gas affordable, they're going to make food affordable. But 5 years later, in the case of the Labour Greens government and $100 billion spent, nothing has seemed to improve. And so I think we as a society need to ask, well, why is that? Why is nothing improving when these guys have been in power so long and so much money has been spent? And the reality is they've spent it poorly. and have spent us into a crisis. And if prefu's anything to go by, we're going to have a couple more years of recession because of the way these guys have used money in this country. We need a different way forward. We need a way forward that actually values productivity, that says we need to actually pay people more. We need a high-wage economy where people can actually afford the welfare they need to live in the society. And that's why I'm proud to be supporting ACT, because I think ACT has a great vision to make that happen. And I think an ACT national government would make New Zealand a high-wage, high-growth economy where people actually have the necessities.
Green parties all across the world have the same 4 core charter principles or things that we're committed to. What differentiates the Green Party of Aotearoa New Zealand is a commitment to Te Tiriti o Waitangi, and there's only 2 parties in our parliament right now that have a commitment purely to the Indigenous version of the text. It's us and Te Pati Māori. That filters through all of those 4 core principles. The first, ecological wisdom, recognition of the fact that resources are finite. If you accept that, then you have to come to understand that if we want a society that works well together, everybody needs to have access to the basics. That's social responsibility, known derogatorily on the internet as social justice. We also believe in non-violence because we're hippies, we don't like going to war, but it's a little bit more complicated than that. If we're going to build systems and society in a way that is inherently non-violent, then we need to ensure that everybody has a space around the decision-making table to design that system. That is what inclusivity and accessibility and universal design looks like. We also fundamentally believe in appropriate decision-making, which means devolving decision-making powers down to the level where it actually affects people. Again, you guys are far too smart to be indoctrinated. Please go home and look at the policies from all of the parties and whether they will actually achieve the things that all of us have promised. I'd also just finally say, shout out to AUSA, one of the 30+ student associations who we worked with in the People's Inquiry into Student Wellbeing. That's the stuff that we do on the ground every single day to try and build the mandate for that transformational change.
Well, tēnā koutou katoa, ngā mihi mahana ki a koutou I tēnei pō. What's good for Māori is good for all. And that's what we say for Te Pāti Māori. What's good for Māori is good for all. We are the only party that will fight and die for the rights of our people. We are the only party that are liberated and not muzzled by Pākehā leaders. We are an Indigenous movement, a forever movement that is going nowhere. We are here to stay, and we will be here forever. So, ngā mihi.
Climate change is obvious. Climate change and overshoot are obviously the world's biggest issues. But housing unaffordability is New Zealand's. We simply have to come to terms with the way that we have treated property as a diseased, bad way of treating property. Everything in New Zealand comes back to housing. An obscenely unaffordable housing market creates massive and myriad social damage. It means not enough money left over for good food and for heating, puts pressure on hospital services, creates stress, puts pressure on mental health services. It creates enemy and crime, and it puts pressure on police services. Everything we talk about here is addressing the symptoms of the broken way that we care for the shelter of our people. Until New Zealand hardens up and addresses and breaks our over-reliance and over-investment in property, government will always feel like eating soup with a fork. It's hard, slow, and frustrating. The Opportunities Party is the only party that can actually comprehensively say that we've got a plan to focus and address that.
Kia ora koutou. Thank you to all of our candidates for being so generous with your time today. Thank you for AUSA for working alongside us at the PSA to bring this together. Thank you to our guys from 95BFM for ensuring that we have live streamed this today. And most importantly, thank you all for giving up your evening to come and spend some time with us. We hope that it has been helpful. We hope that you will be going away a bit more informed, or at least a little bit more interested. And obviously, thank you to my colleagues with the PSA for helping us get this on the road. We have some koha for our candidates in the form of PSA and AUSA merch. So make sure you grab that on your way out. To everybody here, we invite you to stay for Kai. I hear there is pizza coming. I do not know where the pizza is. I saw them leave to go and pick it up, and I don't know. But there's pizza. There will be food very shortly. Have I missed anyone? Nope. Thank you guys again. Big round of applause.